Hello and welcome to a new session on the topic ArchiMate for Architecture Modeling in alignment with the TOGAF Architecture Development Method ADM. Today's session we address the topic of the application domain. Having a look at the PDF we downloaded from the Open Group ArchiMate library, we are now in Chapter 8 Application Domain. Let's get started with ArchiMate open source tool. The architecture we are going to model today is the recommender system architecture. Here we have the business architecture, a very high level business interaction with the different business services, interfaces, and the actors performing the actions on the services. We will have now the application architecture, which is more of a technical nature, what actually will go into the implementation. I'll start by creating a new ArchiMate view. We'll have our actor from the business layer, customer. And then at this stage, we are using the components from the application layer that you can see here. We have addressed more of these components or lots of these components in the business layer, which we have comprehensively addressed over multiple sessions. So you will be familiar with the notations. Component, this is an application component, a module. An interaction, a collaboration. A collaboration is the aggregation of two or more rules. An interface, application interface. Think of it as an API, a REST API, GraphQL, or something else. And then an application function, we have addressed this as a business layer, a business function. Should be similar. And the application interaction, which is the aggregation of two or more application components, services, or components. And the business process, application process, an application event, and then application service, and finally application data object. In the first step, we have here the user interface, front end service, or sometimes we address the PFF backend for front end, if that is the case, if that is needed in this scenario. But I believe this scenario, a front end is enough. And then we have an interaction from the customer to the front end. The first step, the customer authenticates himself, so we will need an authentication authorization server identity service is responsible for authentication, authorization, enforcing roles and permissions. And in that case, to be correct and compliant with the standard, there will be a server relation here. However, the triggers is more interpretable, convenient because the direction of the arrow. However, here, if you think of it in terms of the standard correctly, so it will be served by, so you can see here the flow, other way around, quite counterintuitive. I'll stick with the triggers. And one of the other things is a third-party identity provider. For example, if he logs in with Google or Facebook or other identity provider, this also should be modeled. OpenID, for example. And this will get interesting because there is a flow between the identity service and the third-party identity provider. After the customer has authenticated himself with the third party, he will get a token, share the token with our system. Our system will use the token to query customer information and verify the customer. So there will be a flow here between the identity service and the third-party identity provider. How this interaction between the customer and the third-party identity provider happens? It happens over our own front end. There will be a redirect over to the front end of the customer. For the sake of simplicity, we will say it is a generic front end. Whether it is a window or something else, then it's accessible through our own front end. And this is how the third-party identity provider shares the token over with the identity service. To keep our system aligned, we'll have this at the very top and have identity service step below it, as we are going to model more services in the system. So the customer has authenticated himself. Now he is allowed to browse our catalog. Now we reference our business architecture. We had a product catalog service. This can be mapped one-to-one with our own application layer. So if you are referring to the domain-driven design, so it would say ubiquitous language means you stay with the domain language used by the subject matter experts and the domain experts. So you try as much as you can, whenever it is applicable, to use the same language that you used in the business architecture. I'll say here catalog service. And there will be the interaction over here in this direction. At this stage, we can also start mapping the data object. In the catalog service, the data object is a product or catalog that includes products. So a product data object. And this product data object is accessed by the catalog service. One of the nice things about the open source tool and any other licensed tool, such as Sparks, is that whenever you use the wrong arrow or connector between components that's not compliant with the standards, it will not allow it, and then you need to use the correct one. For example, a service accesses a product. And this is one of the concepts we said we will cover in previous sessions, as there is the concept of behavior element, such as a service or a component. This is an element that performs a function. And there is the passive elements. These are the elements that are used by the service elements or the behavior elements. And the active elements, these are the actors that are triggering the functions and the services, so that you have heard more about it. And you can also reference the concept in the PDF from the Open Group ArchiMate library. Now the customer can browse the services, and having the services, browse the products, and having the products, he can choose which ones he adds to the cart. And now we need a cart service. And this performs the placeholder for the elements that he will check out later. At this stage, you might wonder whether a front end here was needed, but it's important so that you can have this separation of front end and back end. You can also add a grouping with a grouping object later, so that you can also visualize the isolation of the back end and front end, so that you can see this is a microservices architecture. And the cart service, it will have the, whenever you click on an item, add it to cart, it will be added here over in the cart element. And the cart element cart object So we have now a clean and tidy domain object. You can also revisit here the third-party identity provider identity service. We can start adding an object that's accessed by both, and here user info. So this is the one that creates it, provides it, and this is the one that needs it for its operation. Again, you can align the arrows a little bit more. As we have said previously, the alignment is not optimal, and I would also do it very last. So if I change the arrangement of the objects, I need to revisit the objects incrementally and rearrange them to give place for other elements. So these arrows will be distorted, and then you need to add new arrows. So we come to the point we are mapping the actual recommender system itself. Here we can see that we have a collaboration between the product catalog service and the recommender service to provide the recommendation object over APIs. So at this stage, the recommender service is needed, which has an access to a business object, the purchase history, and provides recommendations in the recommendation format. Yes, good point now to start adding this one. Recommender service. And the business object it's accessing is purchase history. And the business object it is creating recommendations. You can even align it slightly differently. You can see here it's creating these recommendations, which are then accessed by the front end, which uses their IDs, retrieve them from the catalog service. And of course, the interaction is direct from the front end to the recommender service. So far, so good. We have bypassed the representation layer here with the APIs, application interfaces. We have also bypassed the application gateway, which is responsible for routing the entire communication over to the different microservices. What we can do at this moment to not bypass or skip the interface element. So it's use here APIs, and this APIs object is here composition relation. It's smaller. Make this one slightly bigger. And you can see it fits quite nicely here in the object. So you can do the same for every service that we are providing, so that you are stating clearly in your architecture that this will be communication over clean APIs that will be following the standards, HATE-OS, for example. Yes, starting to have a skeleton and a shape together. Now we come to the part we are mapping the interface, the application gateway. And what we could have done here, instead of having this, we could say the front end, and this is application gateway, and then have this interaction in this direction, and the application gateway stays on the edge of our cloud or our system. And then we have the front end triggering the application gateway. We will add some grouping so that it's clear where our microservices are or backend. One of the ideas that could also be quite interesting at this stage is having a backend for front end, so that we have the products that are already based on the recommendations. For this scenario, we will slightly shift our diagram in that way and add BFF for products, and then have the interaction here from the application gateway or the front end and the interaction to the recommender system in the direction of the BFF. So that was redundant. We can stick with only one. And then moreover, we can have the interaction from the BFF to the catalog service and the interaction from the catalog service to the recommender service. And remember the recommendations here, this is the object, so now this will slightly shift to this one. It has become very cluttered now. Time to rearrange our diagram. It's smaller. And you can see the interaction with the identity service providers and code. This remains on this stage. So you can see now we're starting to have quite a layered architecture. We can see the customer facing services, the back end services, the back end for front end services. So this is quite okayish. So it's quite nicely aligned. Give some space for our grouping and zoom out, and still stay with the zoom on the page. Add a group. And this group, we give it a name: microservices architecture, application architecture. Of course, for the recommender system scope, if you need to map the entire system, this will be even more interesting, but it will take more time out of the scope of this session. Of course, it would be an entire architecture project. You can spend with your team and the lead architect quite a few iterations trying to align on the actual implementation and how it is done, how it should be done. let's see, yeah, quite okayish here. And fit on page. And let's not forget the legend at the end, quite bigger than it should. Nicely aligned. A little bit to the right, a little bit to the top. And here we have a quite complete business application architecture for the recommender system functionality in our hypothetical use case of an online retail store. And this shows now how the incremental approach from the motivation layer, the strategy layer, to the business layer, and now we are in the application layer, how this all builds up on top of each other, using concepts from software architecture such as domain-driven language, ubiquitous language, domain-driven design, and the microservices architecture. We use an application gateway, we use a pattern of back-end for front-end, and we use head OS APIs. We use data objects to define our domain data models. So this is all possible with the ArchiMate. Finally, we say ArchiMate is not the only way to model the architecture. However, it is one of the comprehensive tools that give you a language, gives you the vocabulary that you need. Perhaps you can apply the same concepts in a different modeling tool. There is no way, there is no statement that says you should only model using ArchiMate. However, if you are seeking the TOGAF and ArchiMate certification, this video I hope should be able to help you get your foot through the door and get started understanding and making sense of the TOGAF and the ArchiMate standards. Otherwise, to be very dry concepts if you only do it for the exam. Here I am showing you that you can also apply it to real case scenarios. Thank you for listening and see you in a future session.